And welcome viewers to today's edition of the Evening Review. Today we're going to do things a bit differently, and we have in studio with our reporter Jemima Beukes, the LPM leader Bernadus Swartbooi. This is their conversation.
Good day, viewers. My name is Jemima Beukes from Namibian Sun newspaper. Today we have Mr. Bernadus Swartbooi from LPM in the studio.
Good day to you and to the listeners.
Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Swartbooi. There's a lot of excitement going around about your return to the parliament under a new banner this time. Can you please give us a brief assessment about your party's performance in the last election, and also point out some areas where you think there are growth or potential for growth?
All right. Well, first, we don't regard the elections of 2019 as the proper elections. We have, after making our thorough analysis, arrived at a proper terminology that it was actually a selection that was organized by the ECN on behalf of Swartbooi Party with a view to select and provide seats in accordance with the wishes and the whims of Swartbooi Party. And that Swartbooi had to, through the ECN, manage the process quite carefully together with the Indian contingent, as we said before in our press release last year, with an Indian contingent that assisted Swartbooi to manage the process in order to ensure that it maintains a grip on power and that it is able to continue the looting of the national resources of this country. And so therefore, nonetheless, that having been said, we have been able to be granted 4 seats in the National Assembly, making us apparently the 3rd largest party, which we dispute because our assessment and the assessment by people inside the ECN is that we obtained at least 25 seats, and that sort of parallels with the numbering that we have done in terms of the voters that we've been able to speak to in various places in the regions, the data that we have, and our internal predictions. It perfectly parallels with what our internal process has demonstrated. Many people do not know that we are, as an organization, quite focused on gathering data and gathering precise data with a view to being able to predict outcomes more or less in terms of the models that we use as a political party. So we have 4 seats, which we regard merely as a transition period in our journey to eventually take over the country and to restore the people's dignity, build an economy, and build a society where young and old is prosperous and well protected. Now, what people can expect as we go into Parliament is to hear from us concrete solutions as to how we can build this country. Youth unemployment is at staggering numbers. The social circumstances of many of our people is devastating. The economic mismanagement of the country's resources has had a terrible impact and effect on small and medium-sized businesses, has had a very, very evident impact on investment from foreign countries and from foreign businesses where we have not over the past 5 years seen any significant investment that would be able to create jobs, transfer technologies, and build a society of prosperity and of fairness. What we expect to do in the Parliament as we go in is to provide tangible, well-calculated, and reasonable solutions for the people of this country. Many people are of the view that we are perhaps going to be misbehaving, that we will demonstrate a particular level of misconduct in Parliament. But I can guarantee those that have voted for us, those loyal supporters and sympathizers, that ours is the principal responsibility to go and propose and articulate and argue and stand for solutions, workable, tangible, measurable, that would impact positively the lives of the people, both immediate, medium, and in the long run. Because we see that whether from the ruling party or from other political parties that have been in the establishment, no real solutions to rebuild the economy, to provide answers to gender-based violence, to provide answers to youth unemployment, to provide answers to the questions of climate change and the issue of recurrent drought, to provide answers to taking society forward into a modern 21st century objective condition. None of those answers have ever been provided by the political parties, most of whom have been able to, through this election, survive and have returned with either 2 seats or have returned with 1 seat or so. We are there really to provide solutions and to do so with a respectful, responsible and decent approach. When, of course, circumstances demand that we will be conducting the affairs of the party's parliamentary wing in a very robust fashion, in a fashion that would be calculated to silence those that are attempting to misbehave, that moment will determine our response, which will be a robust and a detrimental response to those that will try to be quite funny. We are told they are looking for a speaker, apparently to try to control us, our emotions and so on. And I have sent a message to them that in the conduct of the important work of Parliament, you can't be looking for a speaker on the basis of wanting to control people. You must be looking for a speaker that will have the respect of all of us, that will know the rules of Parliament, that will apply those rules fairly and conscientiously, and would carry the broadest possible mandate of all the parties represented in Parliament, not to target LPM, because if you do that, that speaker will have problems in the conduct and the carrying through of his or her responsibility in a way that they will never expect it to have happened. So I am urging some of those elements that are apparently working hard to try to control LPM. That's not going to happen. Forget it. We have to work in a way that helps to make laws that will help to change people's lives for the better, and that's really what is important.
Speaking about that, obviously LPM's biggest, most of LPM's time will not be spent in Parliament. Now, Namibia has a history with the parties that has been born out of the ruling Swartbooi, and who made an electoral peak, and yet they have disappeared into obscurity shortly after. So how is LPM going to distinguish itself from these parties?
Well, of course, it's an important and fair question. Remember that LPM has a very particular ideological stance and has a very important packaging of the fundamental things that are important in the ordering of society, in restoring people's dignity. The question of land, both urban and rural, the question of fairness, justice, and a more egalitarian society are the driving forces and the driving ideological posturing of the party. And those political parties that have gone into obscurity have never defined really what their ideological posturing is, and have never really been able to cement themselves strongly in capturing the imagination of society. And that is why we have, starting with this parliamentary session, already decided to create a special position which is called parliamentary spokesperson, so that we keep Namibians abreast of what specifically the party will be doing in Parliament, so that you do not have this situation where people will say they became quiet once they got into Parliament. The parliamentary spokesperson will be dealing with everyday statements and positions in regards to laws or issues as to why we make certain assertions in Parliament. She will take those determinations and present it to the public. At the same time, it will be the responsibility of the parliamentary spokesperson to take each and every law, each and every proposal, each and every work piece that is provided from the government side and take it outside as a party spokesperson in the parliamentary wing and present these to the sectors that will be affected. So, for instance, if there is an amendment to be brought in to amend, for instance, the Fisheries Act for instance. She will be taking it and going to areas such as Luderitz, such as Wolfish Bay, engage in fully fledged meetings, source the inputs and source our position and reflect that back into Parliament. In other words, we will keep a very direct contact between laws that are made, our statements, our opinions, our political views, and that of the communities as a very close correlation. Secondly, what we will be doing is to constantly work in a coalition with other political parties to ensure that we are able to provide a constant attack on the issues that affect communities, so that Namibians are able to see that other political parties are able to work together, and LPM taking the lead in ensuring that we organize the parliamentary coalition in a fashion that is representative, that is quite outspoken, that is reasonable, but that is also substantive in what we are going to bring forth. That's very important, Jemima, that the substance of what we bring forth will also determine the value that Namibians attach to us as a political party going forward. What I must also tell you is that those other political parties that you say have gone into oblivion have not on their own accord just gone into oblivion. They were targeted. There was a massive investment to infiltrate those parties from the establishment and to cause division internally, and to therefore result that eventually resulted in an internal implosion of those political parties. We have to learn from those experiences and ensure that we protect our party from internal implosion, internal infiltration, and internal division that has the potential of breaking the party down. And the challenge would be to keep on being relevant to young people and their aspirations, to students and their aspirations and their challenges, to the elderly, to those that are disenfranchised, to those with disabilities, to those with special needs, and to speak about issues that are contemporary to society. For instance, the current drought has destroyed so many farmers, so many lives, so many jobs in the farming sector have now been lost. And the assistance that this government does give to people is either ill-timed, inappropriate, and not sufficient to sort of cancel out all of the losses. So many farmers have sold off their farms. So many farmers are now left in huge debts. So many farm employees have been laid off. So many of them will now be in urban areas in corrugated iron sheets. So many children will now go hungry, and the consequences are multiple in substance and in form. And so it's about being relevant as a political party. It's about being contemporary and issue-bound, and about constantly projecting the need for society to remain united and to forge ahead under the emblem of LPM as the fundamental alternative to Namibia's political establishment.
Okay, speaking about that, earlier you mentioned about, you talked about the, you touched on the allegation, well, earlier last year the party had a huge press conference where you talked about Indian technicians being flown into the country to manipulate the election outcome. Now, one of the reasons the Supreme Court has decided not to nullify the 2019 November elections is because there were not sufficient or enough evidence. Now, don't you think it was reckless of the LPM, who at the time indicated that there were evidence indeed not to have brought this to the court?
Jemima, it would be a matter of opinion for others to perhaps say that we were reckless, but let me take you back to what we have said before. We view the judiciary as part of the deep state of SWAPO. Those that were promoted to become justices and to eventually go on to the Supreme Court have been signed off by either Bohamba or by Kengo. And they have historically been members of SWAPO. If they were not, they were signed off, and therefore, because they were signed off after recommendations were made from the Judicial Service Commission, there seems to be, in our assessment, a particular sense of deep-seated loyalty toward continuing to be loyal, at least in various strategic ways in decision-making to SWAPO party and the ruling elite. That having been said, we have always considered, therefore, the judiciary as an important element of SWAPO party's power base. And we had to make an assessment, not an easy one, but one that is based on critical and factual analysis of both our current circumstances and the African experience after independence, and how the judiciary and the parliamentary system have been subservient and transformed into service agents of former liberation movements, as is the case in Angola, as was the case in Zimbabwe, as was the case in Zambia, in Tanzania, and many other African countries, including in West Africa. And so that assessment that we have made from the historical trajectory of other African countries since independence in the 60s has really found place and resonance within our system, in which we found precisely the same setup transplanted as was the case in other African countries, literally transplanted in the Republic of Namibia, making both the parliament and the judiciary subservient essentially to service the interests of the ruling party, and therefore protect the continuous looting capacity through institutional dominance by the ruling elite. We could therefore not, in all good conscience, take our evidence and take our matter to the very same system that is geared toward entrenching Swartbooi Party rule, as did the apartheid judicial system. It's precisely the same thing. As was the case with apartheid, this judiciary is also meant to, in the most fundamental way, keep Swartbooi Party intact. If you look, by way of our own experiences, to all the cases that have been taken regarding electoral challenges of fact or of law that have been taken to the judicial system, none of them have ever succeeded. And it is not because there was a lack of evidence. It is not because there was a lack of compliance with some rules or regulations of the High Court or of the judicial system. But it was precisely because there is an unwritten determination to keep the ruling party intact. No one could tell us that in each and every one of the challenges made by other political parties regarding elections, whether these were challenged to have been fraudulent, whether these were challenged to have been rigged in courts, that those that went to court did either not understand the law, or that at all material times of their challenges, that those other parties, the applicants, have been so dumb, have been so misinformed, have been so wrongly informed about the laws, have been so unprepared to provide evidence, that at every material time that they would lose. No one can tell us that. There have been strong cases submitted to the courts. There have been convincing cases on the preponderance of probabilities that demonstrated quite clearly, in fact, in some instances, beyond reasonable doubt, that there has been rigging. But never have these courts been prepared to rule for a rerun of any elections. And therefore, when you look at that history, and history is an important tool to guide a political party, when you look at that history, the only conclusion we could draw was that there would never be a successful court challenge in this country until and unless there is a fundamental dismantling of the current oppressive political, military, and economic setup in this country. And it will take some time, in which the dominant military political alignment and entanglement in which Namibians are suffering will be dismantled. It is beginning to be dismantled. Now, we knew that we could not submit our evidence to a court that, even after seeing that evidence, would always say no sufficient evidence was placed in front of the court, as was the case with the Itula judgment here. The court found the work, the actions, the conduct, the behavior, and the execution of the elections as unconstitutional. How did the court arrive at such a determination without making a thorough analysis of both the legal and factual circumstances? that the same court then proceeds after finding an unconstitutionality, that the same court then proceeds to say there will not be a rerun of the elections. So you can clearly see that, as was the case in Zimbabwe, the courts, the judicial setup has fundamentally taken a decision many years back that they will never rule against SWAPO where it is being challenged in a rerun, that they will never order a rerun. That's a fundamental decision that they have taken, whether in writing, whether quietly, whether in an unwritten rule, whatever, that I'm not saying. But I'm saying as a fundamental cultural, political, and as a class conglomeration, as part of the elite establishment consensus, they have taken a decision, tacitly or otherwise, never to favor a rerun. They now have to, at all challenges that come before it as it relates to elections, they always have just to find a reason to justify why there would never be reruns. That's all that is happening. However, of course, in this instance, there is a much more deeper thing at play here that I don't think the executive and Gengop himself understands the responsibility placed on them. When you, as a person who chaired the Constituent Assembly and praising yourself as chairperson who drafted the Constitution, praising yourself as a matter of historic record, that you have played this wonderful role to produce this big document and that you are so proud about it. When the court says that the election in 2014 as well as the election in 2019 as it relates to the presidential elections, that those were unconstitutional, the onus is on Gengop to sit back and reflect and say, what is the court saying to him and to his party? And what the court is saying, if they genuinely respect the Constitution, is go back and reflect on the decision by the court that your election is unconstitutional, and then correct it. One of the ways, if he has moral courage, which neither the court has nor he has, if he has moral courage, is to say, I, as a founder father, or as one of the founder fathers of this important document, and as a man who keeps on lecturing the country about rule of law, I feel that for as long as the decision is taken by a court that the elections were unconstitutional, I will call for a rerun. Even if the court didn't say it, I will call for a rerun of the entire elections so that I comply with the basic law of the land and that I remove that black spot in the elections where the court has said it is unconstitutional. That is the moral contrast that he must provide now. The courts have said no rerun, but as a person, hopefully, and he lacks it absolutely, of moral conscience, as a person who claims to have been a founder father of this important document, it is up to him to say the ethical and moral considerations and the fragility of the republic and the democracy we are building requires us to go the extra effort and the extra mile, even at times to our own detriment, to impress upon future generations how much we respect this important document, because the Constitution is the central assembly point of the aspirations of the people, of the values of the people of Namibia in building this Republican democracy. And if, for as long as there is a judgment that says your election was unconstitutional, he should not pride himself with being a legitimate president.
Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for visiting us. There you have it, Mr. Bernadus Swartbooi. Thank you.
Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining us once again this evening. We'll see you tomorrow on the Evening Review.